There we go. Okay, so I'm now recording. So what we do with these long alcohol chains, they're used for a variety of things, such as energy storage. I was talking about how the triglycerides. So triglyceride molecules. These are used for storage of energy. Typically, actually, lipids provide more energy to the body, to cells, than carbohydrates or proteins. Lipids provide about 9 grams per 9 calories per gram of energy, whereas so this is lipids, proteins, and sugars, so say glucose, provide more like 4 calories per gram. So actually, lipids have more carry more energy. It's because of the nature of these hydrogen bond carbons. They've each of them got 2 hydrogens, and on these 2 hydrogens, on the bond with the 2 hydrogens, there is the shared pair of electrons, and this carries a lot of energy. They're highly reduced. This carries a lot of energy, which can be utilized by the cell. So I also covered as well some of the rules to do with these molecules. We'll go back a little bit. To do with how when they are the long chain, just the fatty acids, the long chain fatty acids, how they're named here with this kind of nomenclature, or down here, where the first number is the length in number of carbons, the second the colon, and then the second number, which is the number of double bonds. So this is a mono unsaturated fatty acid. That's saturated means that it's got saturated with hydrogens, and if you have introduced a double bond, there are less hydrogens. Here, this one has got 2 hydrogens, but because of the double bonds, this one has just got 1 hydrogen. And so we call this unsaturated, whereas if it just had all of the hydrogens, it would be saturated. So this is a mono unsaturated fatty acid. So it's just got a number 1 here for mono. If it has more than 1, it's poly unsaturated. And then this delta here refers to positioning of the double bonds, and it's delta 9, which means that the positioning is at the 9th carbon of the double bond, is at the 9th carbon. And then these double bonds are usually in the cis conformation. You know, you have your cis and trans conformations. So this here. Can anyone tell me whether or not this double bond here is in the cis or the trans conformation? Or we can do it by a show of a thumbs up. If you guys think it's in the cis conformation, give me a thumbs up. Okay, and if it's in the trans conformation, can you give me a thumbs up? Well, only one person participated, but that person was correct. This is in the cis conformation. And so most of these fatty acids similarly are in the cis conformation, but you can get them, sometimes these double bonds get by humans, or actually a small amount in nature, but largely by humans. These double bonds, particularly in polyunsaturated fatty acids, can be hydrogenated to put them into the trans conformation. And that's how you get your trans fats that you may have heard of in fast food and things like that. Those are trans fats. That's done because when you introduce, there we go. You can see here when you introduce the double bonds, you get what's referred to as like a kink. You see the double bond, because it's in the cis conformation, doesn't form a straight line anymore. Now it forms a kink. And if you transform it into and that affects it so that it can't pack so well. So lard can pack together really, really well because it just forms, it just, there isn't this steric hindrance getting in the way. Everything just kind of lines up nicely. It can just pack. Whereas when the kink is introduced, they don't pack so well. And because they don't pack so well, that changes their physical properties, such as increasing the melting point. But when you introduce trans double bonds instead, or you partially hydrogenate the cis double bonds, see there were two. If we introduce hydrogenation, then we reduce it down to one, and that one transforms into the trans conformation. Then you see now it's more straight, and so it can pack better. That changes the physical properties. So trans fats tend to be a higher melting point. So this butter is it can pack well. So it's a solid at room temperature. You know, an oily solid. It's melty, but it's kind of a solid at room temperature. The cis conformation, if the polyunsaturated, two double bonds of the same chain length, is a liquid, linoleic acid, linoleic acid, which is a liquid because it can pack well, changes the physical properties. This is all covered in the previous lecture, which is why I'm going so fast. But the trans conformation, it gets more straight, and so it's kind of slightly more solid. So it's actually found in margarine here. This isn't actually really done for because of the conformation and the melting point, the physical properties. It's mainly done because double bonds can be oxidized. They can oxidize to make aldehydes, and aldehydes make food rancid. So double bonds are easily oxidized even by oxygen in the air. So if you remove the number of double bonds, you remove the amount that can be oxidized, so it has a longer shelf life and has better stability as well. It doesn't spontaneously combust as well. These oils can spontaneously combust. Of course, you got like your frying pan can catch on fire. If you have trans oils in there, they're a little bit more resistant to spontaneously going on fire. So this makes it useful in fast food. You can keep it for longer, and it's not going to combust as readily. And so, you know, I was saying that these are bad for you. These are blood vessels. They introduce the amount of LDLs and cholesterol in the arteries, and significantly increase cardiovascular disease. And then the final thing that I covered was these triglycerides. And here you can see that this is this fatty acid. This is the fatty acid I was talking about. Let's go back to the pen. So here's the fatty acid. Here's a fatty acid. Here's a fatty acid. So you can see why it's called tri. It's got 3 fatty acids. They form a bond, chemical bond here, with a glycerol molecule. You can see there's the OH alcohol groups. The carboxylic acid will react with the alcohol groups, and that makes an ester. If you remember from your organic chemistry, so that's why it's acyl. So it's tri. Acyl refers to the ester bond. Glycerol. Triacyl glycerol. So a lot of these things, a lot of these long words, especially in lipids, in biology and chemistry all around, you can just break them down into the separate words. You can just look at them, break them down into separate words, and work out what it's talking about. It's 3 acyl, so ester bonds attached to glycerol. And these fatty acids here, you can have all the different fatty acids. This could be a short chain, it could be a long chain, it can be monounsaturated, it can be polyunsaturated. They'll make a whole range of different triglycerols, or triacyl glycerols. I'll keep saying that. And that's where I got up to in the last lecture. So today we're going to be moving on from that and moving on to the membrane lipids. And this is the same kind of thing. Everything revolves around the backbone of this fatty acid. So there's a lot of stuff that I haven't covered in this recap that I did cover in the last lecture about how to name these long chain fatty acids, because they're involved in a lot of the downstream lipids. And in the membrane lipids, instead of being bound to a glycerol, it's bound to something else, that changes it from the triacyl glycerol into a into a different molecule that makes up the membrane lipid. Something that I meant to cover in the last lecture, but actually missed. Oh yeah, I covered the waxes. Is these lipases and phospholipases. This was one last lecture slide that I meant to mention to the guys last week, but I missed that one out. So does anyone want to take a guess at what a lipase or a phospholipase may be? And think about the word, like I was saying, break down the word. Break down the word. Remember some of the rules which I've told you previously. Break this down into two parts and think about what this might be. What is a lipase or a phospholipase? Does anyone want to take a guess?
An enzyme.
That's right. Yes, thank you. So the A's is a giveaway that it's an enzyme. What about the first bit? Anyone?
Lipid.
Yep, that's it. So it's what the lipases do, and typically things that are A's as well. They tend to be cutting enzymes. So this is going to be an enzyme that cuts up lipids, break down lipids. So the lipases break down triglycerols, as you can see here in the bottom corner. So there we got the triacylglycerol, and the lipase breaks it down back into the glycerol and the fatty acid. Whereas the phospholipases, they break down the phospholipids of the cell membranes. And this has a range of different roles, such as in remodeling the cell membrane, but also as well in cell signaling. Sometimes these are supposed to break down because it signals to the cell, either internally or externally, paracrine, that something is to signal some kind of change in the cell. And these are called phospholipases, which are abbreviated PL. And there's a range of them. There's PLA, PLB, PLC, PLD. PLB isn't shown here, but PLB is something that is as a phospholipase that is both A1 and A2. So you have A1 makes a cut here, A2 makes a cut here, B makes a cut at both, C makes the cut there, and D makes the cut there. They're all ways of just chopping up this phospholipase, which may have a range of different cell signaling functions. An example I really like giving is when humans and a variety of animals actually that have hands are in the womb. Our hands are all joined together, and the fingers are all joined together, and there's cells joining them together. And those cells at some point need to be pruned. That's the term that's used. They're pruned. And so what will happen is that there's phospholipases will signal to break down the cell membranes slightly and signal an apoptotic cascade to cause those cells in between your fingers to die so that your fingers can separate out. So phospholipases have a range of different functions, and lipids, they don't just store energy, they don't just make up cell membranes, they're also signaling molecules as well, because when you break it down, all they are just long chain carbons, and it's just life making use of those long chains of carbons that exist in the environment, exist in nature, using them for a variety of things. And why not use them for signaling? We have an abundance of them. Next thing I wanted to mention is this word here. So this is something that I've mentioned a couple of times. You see this really long word here. For some reason, German comes up a lot in my course. I don't know why, but this is a German word. And in German, what they tend to do, they have these things called, and I know you guys don't speak German, so I've asked you a couple of times, but in German, they have these long compounded nouns. And what they do is, rather than where we might say a bus ticket, or we might say car tire, sometimes the Germans, they just merge it into one fat word instead, which may sound really weird, but if you're used to seeing that all the time, it makes sense. Like if I got the word car tire and I merged it into one word, you guys would still be able to recognize it. It just makes it more complicated because it's all got one, it hasn't got any spaces. That makes it seem really weird and intimidating. But all the Germans do when they see this, they just look at it and they just break it down into its different parts. So this weird long word here actually just means social security insurance. It's one of the longest words in the German language. And so in the same way, in biology, in particular in this lipid section, and actually in the sugar section as well coming up, when you see these long words, break them down into what they are. Glycerophospholipids. That sounds like something that's really difficult, and you guys might be struggling trying to just sheer memorize what this is. Well, memorizing is going to make it really, really difficult. It's difficult to memorize this stuff. Instead, break it down into what you see. Glycerophospholipids. Glycero, right. You know that it's going to have glycerol in there. Phospho, that glycerol is phosphorylated. Lipids, got a long chain fatty acid. Here we go. Fatty acids joined together by a glycerol with a phospho group. Same thing, glycosphingolipids. Glyco, sphingolipid. One fatty acid joined to a sphingosine with a sugar attached. Glyco, sugar. Sphingosine. Lipids, just got the one fatty acid. I guess actually you can't tell the difference between one and multiple, but you'll learn that rule coming up next. So this is this stuff. This phospholipids is what I'm going to be covering next, and the phospholipids too. But really, I always want to, when you see these words, try thinking of them through the lens of breaking down the word rather than just trying to memorize the word, because it'll make it much better, much easier to understand and to study for the test. So next, I'm going to be covering these structural lipids in the membranes. There's 5 of them that we're going to look at. And it may mean, again, that you've got to, you may think, oh, I've got to memorize all of this stuff. Instead of trying to memorize it, breaking it down into the common units. So you see that we have the fatty acids, all of them got those long chain fatty acids attached to them. So all of them got the long chain fatty acids. And the glycerophospholipids, remember that the triacylglyceride has got 3 fatty acids attached to a glycerol. Well, in the glycerophospholipids, instead, what you have is that you have to one of the OH groups of glycerol, you have this phospho group attached. And that phospho group has an extra group attached to that, an alcohol group. And a variety of things get attached or don't get attached to that alcohol group to make subdivisions of this one. But the basic thing is that you have a triacylglyceride, but instead on one of the fatty acids, instead you've got a phospho group, and that phospho group has got an additional group which something else may add on to. Similarly with the sphingosine, I'm going to cover all of this in much more detail later on. I'm just kind of introducing it. Let's move across instead to the glycolipids. And this one, instead of having the phospho group attached to the glycerol, instead of a phospho group attached to the third section, you just got sugar. It's hence the glyco. Glyco means sugar. Don't get glyco and glycerol mixed up. Really easy to do. Glyco means sugar, and we'll cover that in the sugar section in the next group of lectures. Glycerol is glycerol, which is that molecule. Whereas the sugars are those like things like the hexose sugars, like the glucose or things like that. Or it may not be a hexose sugar, but usually it is. So it just has sugar instead, and that sugar could be mono or a disaccharide, and sometimes something can add on to that, although not that often, to extend it out. And then we have these sphingolipids, and this is just where very, very similar, where you have instead of it being bound to glycerol, you have this long chain amino alcohol here, and it's you have like a head group. I don't call it a head group, not a head group. You have like a main joiner connector group here, and then it has a long chain alcohol group that comes down and kind of replaces the fatty acid. I'll cover this later. I'm just introducing it. It does have one fatty acid, and similar to the phospholipids, because it's phospho, it has a phosphate group, and it's usually bound to a choline group rather than having the alcohol. It has an alcohol group, but that alcohol group is bound to choline, and so it's now a choline group. And similarly with the sphingolipids, they can also, instead of it being phospho, it can be a sugar. Same again. And then the ether lipids are something that's kind of on their own, but they're similar to the glycerophospholipids. It's just that one of the fatty acids, rather than having an ester linkage, it has an ether linkage, which is this. That's so this is an ester, this is an ether, so the glycerophospholipids, because of the glycerol, form esters. But there's these ether lipids, which instead form one of the fatty acids. It's not a fatty acid; it's a fatty alcohol, and it forms an ether instead. So that's that. This is all going to be covered in more detail. Just introducing it now. So this is one of the first things I spoke to you guys about way back in August. Remember these amphoteric lipids, where you have the hydrophilic head and the sorry. I have a very needy cat who wants attention, who won't leave me alone. So we have these amphoteric molecules that have the polar head and the non-polar tail. And remember that due to the hydrophobic effect, these hydrophobic tails will stack together, and that pushes out the water. So they don't so much as attract, as water doesn't like packing around them. And so to reduce the amount of water that packs around them, they will pack together to decrease the surface area. So rather than having this area around each one of them individually, they pack together. They no longer do that. That decreases the surface area. So you have these, and they have the polar head. So so lipids in general, because they're long chain alcohols, they tend to be they don't even though it's got the carboxylic acid group, which can form hydrogen bonds, which increases the solubility. They in general they're not very soluble at all. Whereas with the lipids in the membranes, they have the two fatty acids attached to the glycerol, but to the third alcohol group here, you have this phosphate group, and this phosphate group, this is water soluble. This is polar. So suddenly you have this this polar head. So this is the groups of the ester groups of in the head. You have the phosphate group. These are all quite polar, and so these are actually water soluble. And you have the non-polar tails, which is why these might form these form the lipid bilayer. So you have here's a crude drawing of a lipid bilayer. And the lipid interior were all clustered together, whereas the polar heads will be on the outside. And so you have water on the inside and the outside of the cell, but in the middle of the plasma membranes. And this is just going to extend out. I just haven't drawn it. You're going to have the non-polar tails, and so this is what kind of, like I said, this forms the lipid membranes and helps to contain everything. The strong hydrophobic effect and the hydrophilic effect of the tails causes them to congregate together and help to form the organelles, the membrane wrapped organelles and the cell membrane and things like that, help contain everything. That's why cells really are just kind of little factories which are contained, and the walls are made up of these hydrophobic interactions here. And like I say, because of the double bonds, they tend to form the kink as well. They're all in the cis conformation. And remember, I was talking about the alcohol of the phosphate group down here. Well, this is here. So this would be OH, but it's being shown as R to reflect the fact that something can go on there. Sometimes something goes on there, and sometimes something does not, and we'll cover the rules of that coming up in a couple of slides. But these can be modified to give a whole range of different molecules. So, for instance, choline can be added on, or I'm drawing a blank at the moment. There's a range of sugars, all kinds of things can be added on there. Does anyone have any questions so far? If you have a question, just go ahead and just interrupt, because I can't see very well. So yeah, just covering. So these head units that can be readily modified, like I was saying, and different organisms and different tissues will use them. So they tend to what gets added onto the phosphate group there is not random, and it tends to be dependent on the specialization of the cell and tissue. For instance, neuronal tissue, cell recognition, whereas liver tissue, all kinds of different things, they will have they will tend to have the same kind of R group to make up the lipid membrane, because this is all very, very important to the way in which cells work. So I covered the 4 general types already. Or no, sorry, I covered 3 of them. So I covered the phospholipids. I covered that in detail. 2 fatty acids joined to a glycerol, or actually 1 fatty acid joins to a sphingosine. That's a mistake there. Oh, wrong one. 1 fatty acid joins to the sphingosine, because the long chain of the sphingosine makes up the second one. You have the glycolipids, where there's a sugar attached instead of a phosphate group. You have the ether lipids, which one of the connections is with an ether rather than an ester. And then what I didn't mention was the sterols, such as which are kind of based upon the 4 rings joined together. And cholesterol was one of the sterols, but also things like testosterone or estrogen are sterols, and I'll cover those at the end as well. Let's cover for now the glycerol phospholipids. So, like I said, a primary constituent of the cell membranes. 2 fatty acids join onto a glycerol molecule. And then a phosphate group joins onto the last of the 3 alcohols. Remember, if it had a fatty acid connected to all 3, that'd be a triacyl glyceride, but it's only attached to 2 of them, and then something else is attached to the final alcohol group. Now, if you only had the 2, this R record just means a long alcohol chains, and here's the acyl. If you only had 2 attached to the fatty acid, and then no phosphate attached to the 3rd one, you'd have this DAG, diacyl glycerol. And I'm kind of using that as a tool to illustrate like a backbone of things that molecules that exist. And DAG doesn't really exist in cells. It's not really made. It doesn't really have a purpose. There's small amounts of it that are made as side products. But I just really wanted to illustrate this as a kind of a backbone framework to work from, where with these glycerol, the phospholipids, it's glycerol-based phospholipids. You have a fatty acid attached to one alcohol, fatty acid attached to another alcohol. They could be the same, they could be different, they could be unsaturated, polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, and something attached to the 3rd alcohol group, which is a phosphate group. So the phosphate group, when it attaches to here's our glycerol, attaches, and here's the fatty acid attaches to, look at it from the other direction now. So here I'm looking at with the 2 fatty acids attached, and a phospho attaches to the third alcohol. Or another way of looking at it from the other way around, you have the two alcohols where the fatty acid attaches, and then you have the phosphate group attached to the third alcohol group. The way that these tend to be named is that the phosphate is known as, where's my pointer gone? There it is. The phosphate is known as carbon number 1. And then from there you have, no, sorry, I got this the wrong way around. I'm sorry. Sorry, the furthest, sorry, the furthest carbon from the phosphate is carbon number 1. And the fatty acid, so you have a fatty acid at the C1 position, is the first fatty acid. Then you have the second fatty acid, and then the phosphate, like I say, is the furthest away from the first fatty acid attached to the alcohol here, forming the acyl of the acyl glycerol. And something kind of interesting is to note that glycerol itself is a chiral molecule. Okay, so this here is a chiral center because you have four. Sorry, yeah, you have 4 different groups. Sorry, this here and this here. It's harder to concentrate when we've got a doing this at a screen rather than in a classroom. So this is a chiral center because they have 4 different groups. No, this isn't a chiral center either. I'm making a mare of this. There's it's illustrated here where you have the loss of chirality, where when this is no longer even. This is no longer a mirror image of itself, because when you add the phospho group onto one of the alcohols, it no longer has the mirror image, because now you see this, it's now, instead of being a mirror image, if you added a phospho group onto this, it's no longer a mirror image, so it loses its chirality. Normally it is unsaturated fatty acids which are joined to the carbon 2. So remember, going back, carbon 1, 2, and 3 is the one that's got the phospho group onto it. So carbon 1, the fatty acid that tends to be carbon 2. Oh man. Carbon 2, the fatty acid joined to carbon 2 tends to be unsaturated. And like I was saying, that this phosphate group, it has a free alcohol at the end. That this is all the head of the fatty acid. This is the tail of the head of the phospholipid. 2 of the alcohols of the glycerol make up the fatty acid, whereas the third one has the phosphate attached. The phosphate has a free alcohol group, and that alcohol group can be modified. Sometimes it is just the OH, but it can be modified to make a whole range of a table coming up on the next slide, make a whole range of different, coming up on 2 slides, a whole range of different molecules and derivatives. And typically this is going to be charged, which makes it even more polar, which makes it even more able to form hydrogen bonds and dissolve in water, dissolve in aqueous solution. So this phosphate group, here's the phosphate group. So this is like a normal uncharged phosphate group, but these alcohols here can donate their hydrogens, and so they can become charged. So they're acidic, And so that's where we get phosphoric acid. Phosphoric acid, which is in a range of different foods, for instance, is an acid. H3PO4. So there's 3 hydrogens that could be donated away to make it an acid. So there's 3 pKa's, and here's the same kind of thing. It's just a derivative. You just have an alkyl chain bonded to one of the oxygens. You have 2 of them left behind that have hydrogens that can be donated, and so at a physiological pH, because it's acidic, it will donate those hydrogens and become charged, which helps with the solubility, which is why the amphoteric, this polar head, and this non-polar tail, which is in the interiors and buried. And this is the kind of structure that I drew to try and show you how these are all related. Because, like I said, if you try to remember it all as one big thing, like with the German compound noun, it's really difficult. If you break it down to what it is, you have the triglycerides, which I talked about last week, where it's just a glycerol, triacyl glyceride bound to 3 fatty acids. Diacyl glyceride doesn't exist really in nature. I mean, it exists, but isn't really utilized very much and very often. Very, very small amount of it. But just as a tool for illustration, just have 2 fatty acids, which means that you've got a group left behind that's something that combines to. And then the glycerophospholipids, phospho, bound to a phosphate. And that phosphate itself has an alcohol group that's reactive, that it can react with something else to further modify it and make further derivatives. And this is a bunch of ethanolamine. That's the other one I was trying to think of. Choline is really, really common. This is a choline group, and this here, this point X, will bind here to the phosphate. Here binds to the phosphate to extend it, so they extend out for the choline. So these are further modified ethanolamine, serine. This is a lot in the brain tissue, and then you have the sugars as well, which we will cover a little bit, but particularly, I mean, glycerol is a sugar because it's a carbohydrate. It's got the H2O and the carbons. But the main thing really we're looking at is like things like these hexose sugars. In particular here, cardiolipin, funnily enough, is a lipid which is present in the heart cells and help mediate energy being utilized properly in the mitochondria of the myocytes, myocardiocytes in the heart. But yeah, there's a range of different modifications. Main one that I want you to, don't memorize all of these. I'm not going to test you on all of these. Main one I want you to know about is the choline, or I guess in the unmodified, where it's just an H. Phosphatidic acid and phosphatidyl choline. Those are the ones that I want you to learn and remember. And it'll be also good, advantageous to know, one, that there are other things. Don't have to really memorize what they are, but just remember that there are other things. In particular, remember that they are sugars and cardiolipins. I won't ask you for the structure of cardiolipins, but I might ask a question just mentioning cardiolipins. And so you may want to remember that they are part of the glycerophospholipids. But there may be which of the following is true, and I'll mention cardiolipins. And in order to kind of not throw you off, remember that they are part of the glycerophospholipids. But the main ones I want you to remember are these two: the phosphatidic acid and the choline. So next we can that's everything to do with the phosphatidylcholine. And then this covers everything to do with the glycophospholipids. So we're moving through this material. It's just a bunch, unfortunately, it's just a bunch of rules. It's just rules. There's nothing I can really, I just got this material that I really want and need you guys to know and to come away with at the end of the course. And unfortunately, this part of the course is just rules about lengths of carbons and modifications to carbons. And it's all just kind of organic chemistry. But unfortunately, it just that's just the nature of it. You just have to know these things. It's not so much concepts at this point, although I try to introduce concepts to make it easier. It's just memorizing these things. So remember, German compound nouns. Let's break this down. So here's our glycerol, phospho, choline, phospholipid. Break it down into the different groups: the fatty acid, the glycerol, the phospho, the choline. Break it down into all of the different groups: phosphocholine, glycerol, diacylglycerol, glycerol phospholipid. Break it down into all of the different components. And you can have modifications here. You can have modifications here by changing the fatty acids. But these phosphotylcholines, the little bit of application, often abbreviated PCs. These PCs, a lot of the lipids are abbreviated with these two letters. PC or TG for triglycerol, PC for phosphatidylcholine, cardiolipins, CL. This is used a lot, and they make up a lot of eukaryotic cell membranes, but not so many prokaryotic cell membranes. So you know, that makes a pretty good question. Are PCs in prokaryotic or eukaryotic cell membranes? That'd be a good question. The ether lipids. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because it's not really, there's not really so many of those. But like I was saying, this is our glycerol. This is our phospho. This is the modification to the phospho. And this is our R group making up the fatty acid. And here we have an R group that instead of making up a fatty acid, it's a fatty alcohol. Fatty acid alcohol. And you see here, this is ether-linked alkene. So alkene refers to the double bond, and this is the ether group, and this is the alkene. And it's just that because it's they use the ether alcohols, and an ether alcohol joined on here onto the glycerol to make these and so it's just a slightly different from a glycerol phospholipid. Instead of it being the only difference is a glycerol phospholipid. Both of these are connected by ester bonds with the ether linked alkene. Instead, one of them is this ether group here. It's joined by that ether group here. They're not really very well. Here we go. Vinyl refers to the double bonds. Vinyl is an old chemist word for double bond. We don't really use that anymore. We say alkene instead. Sometimes they're called olefins too. Old chemists might refer to alkenes as olefins, but it's just vinyl just refers to the double bonds. And where am I up to? So yeah, so these have there are some of these that have been detected. They're very strong cell signal molecules, but a lot of the function isn't really known. We do know that they are resistant to cleavage by the lipases. Remember those phospholipases? We had the A, B, C, D, E. That the A's and the B's will cleave here, and so they are resistant to most of the PLA and PLB phospholipases, which may be important to their function. We don't know. Found in a lot of bacteria, but also found in humans as a signaling molecule. So it's platelet activating factor, sometimes called PAF. So here is the here's the phosphate group. Remember, I keep getting this the wrong way around. I'm sorry, guys. So remember that in the glycerol phospholipids, the phosphate is the furthest alcohol, so it's alcohol number 3, which means that this is alcohol number 2. This is alcohol number 1. So at alcohol number 2, C2, you have this acetyl group. So the fatty acid is actually a very simple acetyl, and then we have this long ether attached here to the fatty ether attached here to this the first carbon 1 long chain alkane, and this makes a molecule called platelet activating factor, and not surprisingly it activates platelets in the body. So this is it's the first signaling lipid to be identified maybe 80 years ago, something like that, and very, very strong, stimulates the aggregation of blood platelets. So this is what causes blood clots to form and like scabs on your arm if you get a cut. This platelet activating factor will bind to the platelets and cause them to aggregate and form scabs or clots inside your body, which is really going to be really important to plug up any holes in your vascular system. It's also a mediator in inflammation. The inflammation is to do with regulating the immune system. Inflammation gives you things like redness or swelling, increasing temperature, the classic markers of inflammation. But I'm going to move on to those. The third and final of the membrane lipids, these sphingolipids. And instead of it being glycerol that makes up that backbone, it's the sphingosine. I'll show you the structure of sphingosine in a moment. And because of the nature of a sphingosine, here it is. Unlike a glycerol, where it's got the 3 alcohol groups, one of the groups is an amine group, you see here. And so the linkage, rather than if you have an alcohol plus a carboxylic acid, you get, do it properly, an ester. But an amine and a carboxylic acid gives us an amide. And you may remember the amides from the amino acids. And so that's the linkage that's made between amino acids. The amide, aka a peptide in amino acids, only for amino acids. And the so here we have an amide linkage instead. These are it's known as an amino alcohol because amino alcohol. And this is kind of like its R group. It's a long chain vinyl monounsaturated alcohol chain. And so to the amine group, you have a fatty acid binding. And then to one alcohol is free, but the alcohol nearest to the amine group, that's at carbon number 1. That is that has got a head unit where something can attach, similar to the group of phospholipids, glycophospholipids. So the alcohol that's furthest away from the chain is carbon number 1. Carbon number 1. At carbon number 2, you have the carbons attached to the amine, which forms the amide with a fatty acid. Remember, there's a whole chain of a family of fatty acids, and then the furthest, like I said, is the long chain alkane with the vinyl group, the alkene at the beginning. So, so the backbone is with sphingosine instead of glycerol. I mean, the fatty acid is joined by an amide rather than an ester. The polar group is connected usually to a sugar or a phosphate group to the one of the alcohols on the sphingosine. And you have these, something that's very, very common and something which I will delve into a little bit of detail with application is the glycosphingolipids. Glyco, it's going to be talking about sugar. Sphingolipids, well, you know that you're talking about the sphingosine lipids now instead. These are important in cell recognition. So these will be on there'll be some glycosphingolipids and the arrangement of the sugars, which are on that extra group of the sphingosine. They are going to, there's an arrangement of sugars. These typically hexose sugars. You guys know this stuff. I'm not going to finish drawing it from way back in some biology courses. And this is just a basic hexose sugar. And these can join together. Sometimes they're drawn as circles and squares. These monosaccharides join together to form polysaccharides, which I just got a notification saying my internet connection is unstable. Have I broken up, or can you guys still hear me? Can you guys give me a thumbs up? Yeah, okay, good. Thank you. So they can form these, I'll draw the L for lipids. These are chains of sugars for the glyco, and these different arrangements of sugars will mean that when this lipid makes up the lipid bilayer of a cell, these different arrangements of sugars can be recognized by different components of the cell and will change whether or not be recognized, particularly with blood typing and with it's in neuronal tissue as well. I realize I've only got 15 minutes. I've spent a lot of time waffling. I'm going to go a little bit faster. But you guys have the slides to go through this yourself. So I've drawn my illustration here, like I did before, and this is just a sphingosine. See, it kind of makes up one of the legs of the fatty acid. Then there's an amide linkage making up the connection to the other fatty acid. Then you have the group that attaches here to the remaining alcohol, like I was saying. And if it's on its own and it's just a hydrogen, so there's no extra group, that's what makes ceramide. You may have heard of ceramide as in moisturizers containing ceramide. That is this molecule, but the X is an H. And that's considered to form the basic backbone of these sphingosines. This is often referred to as, when it's just an H, it's often referred to as a ceramide, and the ceramide backbone. But instead it can have the phosphocholine, there's the phosphocholine, and this makes the name of the lipid at the end will be sphingomyelin. Myelin is in the myelin sheaths, which wrap around neurons that make white matter in the brain. Like I was saying, you can also get sugars. And like I said, they get circles, squares, or diamonds to illustrate the complex sugars that make up the X group here. So, like I've already mentioned, ceramide, already mentioned sphingomyelin, which makes up the myelin sheath that surrounds the nerve cells in animals, and these are their structures. This is the ceramide. No, it's not. It's phosphatidylcholine. This is that same thing again. I don't know why I put it up there. And it's similar in structure. Notice it's similar in structure. This is phosphatidylcholine and sphingomyelin. They make similar. They have a similar structure. This is where it's with the triacylglyceride. Oh, not this is with a glycerol. This is a phosphoglycerol. And this is the glycerol instead. And this here is the sphingosine. So this is the glycerol, the sphingosine, and see they're just similar in structure. The main thing being the amide, and the fact that the one of the long chains makes up the whole of the. Remember, one of the long chains, sphingosine, makes up one of the chains that would be a fatty acid if it was the glycerol. So these are the analogues. This is the first thing that I was talking about. This is that second one, or actually third, because I guess the ethers were the second one. But the ethers are done with now. We're not talking about that anymore. So blood grouping. This is what makes up the blood grouping. So remember, these are molecules, the lipids that are on the bilayers of cells. These are on the outside of cells, and so this is this ceramide is making up the majority of the tail, and then I guess this little bit of the here is making up part of the head, but the rest of the head is made up of this sugar. Sticks out on the head, and this is a chain of sugars. Each one of these is a different sugar, like glucose, something like that. And these sugars all chained together, and this is what makes the cell recognize the. This is what an outside, like the immune system, might recognize in order to determine whether or not it's your friend or foe. And you see that in the O antigen, so if you're blood type O, you don't have this extra sugar, whereas in the A, you've got one type of sugar, and in the B, you've got another type of sugar. And these sugars are added on by glycotransferases, which is an enzyme. A's makes it an enzyme. Transfer, glycosyl, or syl refers to the bond between sugars, glyco is sugar, so it's adding on the sugar. So depending on which glycotransferase you express in your body, in which you have, you will add on a sugar or not add on a sugar to this end of this chain of this glycosphingolipid, which will affect your blood type. So if you've got the glycotransferase, which transfers this group, then you're A. You've got the glycotransferase form that transfers the galactose, then you've got blood type B. Or if you have no glycotransferase, you've got the O antigen and no. O just means none. You don't have it, so you're missing it. Which is fine. It doesn't make you better or worse than any other person. The people with O actually are slightly more likely to get a small number of diseases, but you're slightly more resistant to the Black Death, which means that very few people in general have O blood type, except in Europe, where the Black Death was very, very common, and the Black Death was very common, so you're more likely to survive. So there's more people with O type, even though it means you're more likely to get a small number of extra diseases. In East Asia, a lot of people have B blood type, and in Africa and large parts of Europe and large parts of other parts of Europe, and actually Africa and Europe tends to be A, except in Europe it's been enriched for O because of the Black Death. B is in East Asian and the Americas. Well, there's been a lot of immigration in the Americas. It's kind of messed it up a little bit, but I believe in native populations it's slightly more in B. And this is what makes up the blood types. So if you're blood group A, that means that you've got the A antigen, which means that if you were given blood type B, it would make you sick. Similarly, if you've got blood, you can hear. We've got blood type B. You've got the B type antigen. The antigen refers to the antigen is a thing that an antibody recognizes. So you've got this recognition site. So you've got the B antigen, which means that your body attacks the A antigen. So if you're given type A blood, then it would harm you. If you've got AB, then you've got both A and B antigens. See, you've got both A and B, which means that you're not producing any antibodies against A or B because you've got them, and you can receive A and B blood. Because if you've got blood group O, you haven't got it, which means your body's going to want to attack both A and B blood because it recognizes it as being foreign. And so you can donate to anyone because you haven't got any antigens, but you can only receive from other O's, and that's shown by this chart here. O, because you've got no antigens, you're going to attack all of the antigens. So because you've got no antigens, you can give it to anyone because they won't have antibodies against you. But you can only receive from other O's. Whereas if you've got AB, so you're the universal donor. If you've got AB, you're a universal receiver because you don't have antigens against A or B because you've got them. And you don't have any antigens against O because it's got nothing to have an antigen against. So I know I'm going real quick. Yeah, I'm not doing too bad, but I still have to go quick. This is to do with heritable diseases, inborn errors of metabolism. Just one slide just on application here, because I want to introduce application to make it a little bit less boring. So here we have our it's the ceramide. These are the sugars that are attached to it. This makes it a ganglioside. So this is the one type of one recognition group. This tends to be in the brain cells, gangliosides in particular. And this is really showing metabolism. So this is enzymes. Here's an enzyme. Here's another enzyme. Here's another enzyme. These are enzymes changing these lipids into different lipids to suit the need of the body, to suit the need of the cell. And so it's taking off the galactose group, change it into this. See, it's one shorter, and it's just transforming it, changing it, breaking down the lipids into things that it might want, or just to break them down so they can be metabolized into energy or something like that. Now, where these enzymes, there's a hereditary mutation, hence inborn. These can't be metabolized properly, and they cause various diseases, errors of metabolism. A mutation causes, or polymorphism, I prefer to say polymorphism because mutation just sounds horrible. Polymorphism means that you have lower activity of these enzymes, which means that they can't break down the lipids properly. And so it causes a range of different diseases. The disease I'm giving an example of is Gaucher disease, where it causes this is a fat-containing cell, and it swells because you can't break down the glycolipid, glycosphingolipid can't be broken down properly because you lack this enzyme, glucocerebrosidase. And so the cell swells, and typically the nucleus moves over to the side, and it causes swelling of the liver and the spleen. So this poor child here has got a swelling of the liver and spleens, giving them the big belly. But actually, you can just treat them. This is a new treatment that is may or may not work, and it has side effects. But by treating people with this enzyme, see that it's treated the disease. The body has been able to break down these lipids. Niemann-Pick disease is a brain disease that causes dementia very, very young in people, and these are all similar diseases caused by the enzyme not working properly, not being able to break down lipids. One of the final lipids to talk about is these sterols. Remember I said that, so this is completely different. Membrane lipids we're all done with. We've only got 5 minutes. Membrane lipids we're all completely done with. These are made up of these, it's called a lipid. Now, it's got nothing to do with fatty acids, completely different. This is a completely different thing, but fortunately it's very short. Very little to talk about here. But I do need to introduce them. These are, even though they're very completely different from everything we've spoken about before, they're referred to as lipids because of the long carbon chains. Long carbon chain makes it referred to as a lipid. And these 4 rings here, A, B, C, D, these make up the sterol backbone, often referred to as a steroid nucleus. Nucleus means center, so it's just a steroid backbone. And various things can add on to here, particularly the polar head group, which doesn't really make it very, very soluble in the end because there's so much added on here. And this backbone This can be modified a lot. So in cholesterol, this is not actually cholesterol. This is the wrong image in here. Cholesterol, the side group is changed, and this cholesterol is very common. You've all heard of cholesterol. It's integrated into cell membranes, where it's thought to have a role in membrane fluidity and permeability. So fluidity, the movement of the cell membrane, makes itself squishy or more rigid. It makes cell membranes more rigid. It also regulates permeability, so things that go in and out of the cell. It's mainly in eukaryotic cells, not so much in prokaryotic cells. We obtain it from food, but we can also synthesize it. And it's carried around by lipoproteins. Lipoproteins are assortments of lots of proteins coming together. The apoproteins come together in an assembly to carry around cholesterols. And cholesterol tends to be in low density lipoproteins. So low density apo assemblies of proteins tends to deposit cholesterol in arteries, which will clog the arteries. You also have lipids of chemical messengers. I'm completely running out of time. I'm sorry, guys. So this is that cholesterol backbone. And you see that's just been modified. So these groups here, the sterol nucleus is modified to make these hormones here: testosterone, cortisol, estradiol, prednisone, aldosterone. They're all modified cholesterol. Effectively, they're more soluble, and they're very important signaling molecules in the cell. And that covers everything to do with sterols, like I say, carried with the bloodstream, and male and female sex hormones in particular. Cortisol is not, but the rest of these are. That covers everything to do with sterols. I told you, I promised it was quick. I wanted to just mention that sometimes the lipids, like I said, they could be those phospholipids can be chopped up by the lipases, those phospholipases, and that makes these chemical messengers. For instance, this phospholipase here, with this phospholipid is the glycerol, fatty acid. There's the phosphate, and there's a sugar attached to it. This could be cleaved by phospholipase C, and it creates this molecule, phosphatidylindosole, and this is a signaling molecule in the cell. And so sometimes the cell will chop up the phospholipids, particularly glycophospholipids, and make these, the PI refers to this little bit here, and then the P refers to the fact that they can be, the sugars get phosphorylated sometimes here. They said in the textbook, they say, imagine that it's the sugar is a turtle, but I don't find that any easier at all. That just confuses me. You can count the positions by the turtle's feet. I don't want you guys to do that. But yeah, it gets phosphorylated. It gets the lipid gets cleaved, the sugar comes off, gets phosphorylated, and then that phosphorylated sugar is a messenger. And so the lipids are a reservoir of messenger molecules for signals in the cell to do things like go faster, go slower, metabolize, divide, things like that. Growth signals are quite typical. Also have as well this long fatty acid, arachidonic acid, can be modified by various enzymes to make these downstream enzymes. You can read about this. You need to read this and know this for the exam and for the quizzes. I don't have time to go over it now, but you'll just have to read it. I put this little bit in here to try and help you memorize the naming schemes. This is just a little practice question in a way. But these make different things, including prostaglandins, which give you pain, and the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs such as Advil. They block the conversion of arachidonic acid to prostaglandins to make to relieve pain, because these cause pain. It also inhibits the thromboxanes as well. The thromboxanes are important in blood clotting, which is why you get the side effects of bleeding out from too many non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. And the final thing, there's also vitamins, which are based upon steroids, sterols. They're called lipids as well, because it's long chains. Vitamin D, vitamin A, and vitamin E and K, just long chains of carbons that are referred to as lipids because they're long chains of carbons. Very, very final thing, they can separate it because of their physical properties. They're insoluble in water, which means we can extract them in organic. So if we get cells, we mash them up and mix it with water and something like methanol or methanol water, which is more an aqueous, or chloroform. The lipids will go into the chloroform, whereas sugars and things and proteins will stay in the top. We can separate these out using things like chromatography, where different lipids will have a different affinity for a column. And you can use this to analyze lipids, separate out mixtures of lipids, and run mass spectrometry on the lipids, and formulate a lipidome for lipidomics. And that covers everything. You will need to know all of the material, although I didn't have a chance to go over it all because I ran out of time. So you're going to have to go through this on your own. But I will upload this lecture so you know what kind of things to cover and have some background. But that covers everything for the lecture today. I won't be in the office today. But if you have any questions, send me an email, or you can I'm going to stay online for a few minutes